to talk about a bit about technology first. So this is a good place to start. What's happening here? As you watch this, you'll see that something happened and it's completely transformed than what it was when you first saw it. And there seems to be water where there wasn't any. And so what you're seeing is a woman standing in front of a wall of flame. She walks towards us and she falls into a pool of water that didn't seem to be there, and the image breaks up in a series of these waves and colors. So first of all, just let me say, I can honestly say this, there are no digital special effects in this work. The image of the woman in the fire was shot directly on site by a 35mm film camera. The key point is that the camera was looking not at her directly, but at her reflection in this 90-foot long pool of water. So you were seeing from the very start an image of an image. And her fall caused these waves to disrupt the water surface and reveal that in fact this was someone disturbing their own self-reflection, and of course creating beauty and mystery at the same time. So first thing I want to say to you tonight is that things are not what they seem. And do not ever forget this.
Today's discussion
could be the difference between your life and death one day. Now I've been making art for a long time. Started in 1960 when I was still a student. Even had an exhibition at the Kennedy Center when I was a junior in college. This video was brand new and there weren't a lot of people doing it. And I have to say, after all these years, I think the most powerful and lasting impression I have is the fact of the power, the affirmation, and significance of the human presence that lies in all these things we make. There's literally part of ourselves in these material objects that we create and construct. And I include in that the digital realities inside the computer. They all start with this little spark in the heart and mind of a human being. And I didn't really think about this too much when I was working for the first part of my life until I lost my mother in 1991. Several years later, I discovered this old bowl up on a shelf at the top of the kitchen cabinets, and something she'd given us years before, and I pulled the thing down and I had this amazing, emotional, powerful experience with this little dorky bowl. Little simple, dumb ceramic bowl.
Coming to the
And
second
I could
theme
feel
of
and
today's
sense her
discussion.
presence as she handed it to us that time in Japan. And you know, I'm from a generation that really eschewed materialism and material objects. That was a big thing in the late 60s and the 70s. And we were going somewhere else. The actual virtual world was, at that time, for that generation, first opening up. Other than shamans and mystics who've been doing it for thousands of years. And pretty soon, looking around me, I realized that every creation is like this. Every single thing has memories in it, has a human presence in it, and everything that human beings make is alive. That's why you can go into a museum and you look at a reindeer bone from the early Paleolithic age, and the only thing that catches your eye, that distinguishes that as being something special, are two marks on the side of that bowl, made by a human being 130,000 years ago.
The intensity
He or she made their mark.
authenticity.
Gives you goosebumps when you see something like that. And of course, the most important thing about these material objects, and that is so humbling, in fact, is, for the most part, they outlive us. So these experiences got me to thinking, why do we collect art? Why are there towns and centers? You know, why are there groups of individuals who take it upon themselves to fund museums, galleries, orchestras, theaters? This same eternal spark that we sense in the ceramic vase in ancient Greece from 350 BC, or even a contemporary music composition by John Adams in 2009. You feel that energy, you feel that life in that object that wasn't living before. And we all share this never-ending desire to create something that will last and live on, because in the end we know that individually we will not. So we constantly search for meaning. We look for our reflection in eternity in the things that last. So the key element at work here is something I,
Okay, it's an hour-long conference by Bill Viola, and I picked that as an introduction to this session because it really explains much better than I do what we want to talk about in the class. And I need to explain that, okay, we've switched the feedback sessions. So we start with the session on 6331, Aesthetics of Interactive Art, and we'll be doing 6300, Interdisciplinary Approaches to Arts and Technology after this one. And basically I will be covering the same topic than last week because there was a technical problem, there was no sound into the video, so I deleted the video online. And I made sure, and I need to double check that in fact we do have sound, so that will tell me, yeah, it's the little thing is moving, so it says, okay, we're recording. Yeah, all right. So, oh, and a few technical things about 6331 summaries. They have to be first-person summaries. Like, you do not write your summary. In his last paper, Nick told us about that and that. You just pretend you're Nick and you write from this perspective. So you become the author and you write the summary from this perspective. You need to put yourself in the shoes of the author. And
so instead of saying like he wrote blank and blank, you say
you go directly to the content of the paper.
Like if you was writing the abstract of your own.
Yeah, exactly. Just as if you were the author and writing the abstract or something.
okay.
Okay? And that way that's a principle of economy. You will use words only to talk about what's in the paper and not something that is not very much interesting. You say, in his last paper, Francis said, okay, in his last paper, Francis said, with already 8 words that have been used to bring nothing. Okay, nothing
Like you
interesting.
just say paragraph 2 discusses work.
Oh yeah, you can, but the idea is to really make that summary something that really wraps up the main ideas and concepts of the paper. And it doesn't have to be sophisticated in terms of rhetoric. And just basically try to go directly and say as much as possible of what exactly we have in this paper. Okay? I've been starting to look at the third papers right now because there's already quite a huge number of drafts of the third paper, and I think that we're moving in the right direction. There's still some students who do not use their own experience as something that really pulls everything in the same direction, and they will need to go there and try to experiment with that idea. And really it's using your own experience as a vector, meaning that all the concepts that you're presenting in the paper, they are polarized by your own experience. That's the idea. But we are getting better and better, I think, in terms of quality and intensity of the papers. Right now, when I read most of the papers, I can really understand what the student felt and how it's related to the work of art and how it makes sense with the work of art. So I see a really much more interesting convergence between the experience and the conceptual aspects of the work of art. So that's good. And I think that will, I'm more than sure that this will help you in the future, in your life as an artist for most of you, or even as an art goer for.
I know personally I've been trying to take y'all's advice, and I think this most recent paper's been a lot better than my previous two.
Yeah, can tell. Yeah, I think that it starts working. And
I did have one thing I wanted to, a topic I wanted to bring up though about
Okay.
the papers.
Mm-hmm.
So I really appreciate y'all's feedback on it,
Mhm.
but I was wondering, would it be possible to get feedback maybe when we submit our drafts instead of our finals, so that we could actually implement the feedback before
In
we
fact,
turn it in?
well, but I can tell, yes, I'm trying to get there. That's why I was mentioning I've been looking at the drafts. But then, yeah, but I will probably use spring break to operate this transition,
Okay.
because I don't want to find myself reading at the same time the draft and sending comments on the draft of a paper and the final of the other one. But that's possibly a good idea. If I cannot make it, because I'm not sure I will have really time to perform this transition, well, you need to think also of your papers. They are not detached from one another, which means that the feedback given on paper 2 is, I'm trying to make it as much as possible usable for the next paper, like paper 3 and so on and so on. And because in the class there's no idea as a grade that's attached to the paper directly. So
Because that was a concern of mine.
yeah, so and I could feel it. That's why. Okay, so there's no idea of a grade that's attached to a paper. Okay, the fact of submitting the paper makes the grade, and the critique, the comments, and the review, it's the work, and it's not graded. It's part of our work that we're doing all together. Me reviewing and commenting, and you implementing the changes. So I'm not grading the papers. So basically, and it's also to say that rewriting your paper to incorporate my remarks will not help in your grade. Okay, I would rather have you saying, okay, I understand what you want, I will apply it to the next one.
Okay.
So
yeah.
what I'm interested in is that progress of your way of dealing with the work of art,
Okay.
much more than the paper itself. Okay? But definitely I will try to do this, that transition, moving from critiquing the final, critiquing the draft instead of critiquing the final.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Can you please rephrase? So you said the question of the grading is not related to the paper?
To the comments I make on the paper.
Okay.
Sometimes I feel like there's a great paper because I have so many remarks
Mm-hmm.
to add to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
My question for you was, so how is helpful the feedback that you get from your fellow classmates? Because that's the feedback you get after the draft, right? Someone is assigned to read your paper.
Yeah.
So you think that the feedback coming from us are more valuable than the one coming from your.
Well, as a student, I thought, oh, these are the people who are going to be determining my grade. But as coming from the other students, it doesn't seem as it is in depth. I do get the feeling from some student sometimes that it's more of like they're trying to be a little nicer. But that doesn't mean that they're not saying things that are helpful. Like this last paper, my response for the draft, it was like, oh, well, this part of your paper really made me think, and I was like, good. I'm glad that was successful. And then they said, it made me think about this. Maybe you could implement this. And I was like, good idea. So it was more of like suggestions on how to expand the paper,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and I have gotten responses of that are more of like this part confuses me a little bit more, or I disagree with the way that you explain this or something like that too. So that's helpful. But like when you sent, I think you were the one sending the email about the formatting, like when I put the
Yeah, the keyword.
yeah, I mean that's something that I don't think a student would say.
Okay.
But
okay.
Yeah. Putting the
Okay,
definitions
yeah,
of your
fine.
keywords and stuff.
I mean, I didn't even
Okay.
think about doing that. I was just following the order that you listed in the syllabus.
Okay.
Yeah, I looked at your paper because you're always like the first to upload, or I looked at your draft and I was like, wow, I'm gonna follow this structure because it makes more sense.
Yeah, I actually got that structure from Michael because I saw his first paper
Oh.
and he did it like that. And I
Oh,
was
wow.
like that.
From him.
That's funny. Yeah. Okay. Well, good. Good. So, so everything to me is working well in the class in terms of paper and how you react to it. I would like to add just one more recommendation when it comes to pick the work of art that you will be discussing. One of the criteria that you should be using is, do I have access to enough of representations of this work of art? So for example, if it's a video work, is there somewhere something that's close to the entirety of the work somewhere on the internet, or can I go and see it somewhere in a museum close by? So try to select works of art that you will be able to actually see,
Yes,
Something that you've already experienced.
or that you've already seen,
Because
and you
most
can.
of mine have been stuff that I've already experienced. Because like as I'm talking about this work of art, it's like this reminds me of something I've already seen.
Yeah. So something that you've been really experiencing directly or as close as possible.
That was
to
particularly difficult for me with this last chapter because it's charged environments.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to get the sense of a charged environment even through a video, which arguably is the highest level of engagement of any media.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was just kind of trying to supplement with like as much as possible.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah, you need to make sure that there's
And yeah,
video documentation, papers on it, and
because I think one of the environments I chose of actually has a duration of 20 minutes. But finding all the different movements of that duration on YouTube is, I found maybe 10 minutes, so I found like half of it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah, no, definitely especially for this one, there's something.
Yeah, and the constraints of a charged environment, you really got to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
I've just been personally struggling with that.
I know for my paper, did you read my last draft?
I kind of skimmed it. I
To give
didn't
you
read
an
it all the way
example,
yet.
Like I instead of picking something that was like the same sort of theme that he talks about, I picked something that relates to the theme that I want to discuss in that specific piece of art. So it didn't, like I picked a book. I picked George Orwell's
Yeah, I saw that.
1984, which is obviously not a charged environment. There's no
Mhm.
electricity going through the book. But I'm assuming that was okay because it was basically an expansion on a theme that I was talking about rather than the type of work. So I'm like, I guess my suggestion would be don't feel like you're constrained
Yeah.
to something like that because it is hard to find something.
Mhm.
like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that correct? And
Yeah, that's
Okay.
that's perfectly acceptable. Well, the idea, you need to invent whatever strategy is best for you to
Yeah.
engage in this kind of really it's nothing else than introspection.
Yeah. For this final, I was gonna just like look at your paper and some other people's and just kind of see get a survey of what kind of,
Mm-hmm.
tactics people use. So.
Yeah.
Because I've personally been struggling with the whole charged environment, trying to really get it.
Yeah, that's a, I would say, quite a confusing one.
Yeah.
That theme.
I mean, the other thing I chose was John Cage's Imaginary
Yeah.
Landscape #4, and there's a
Yeah.
video of a college band performing it.
Mm-hmm.
Though, I mean, I don't know, maybe I need to listen to it in here or something. The sound quality of the recording just seems like it's from a cell phone or something, probably.
Yeah.
And that, it being radio static, I mean, that kind of. But,
Yeah, but
I mean, I
this one
chose
there's-
that one because it's a little more grounded.
no, and there's for this one there's tons of documentation
Yeah.
on this one, and there's this complete recording of this performance. There are extracts from other performances of it. So that's something really easy to imagine what it is, because the concept is so clearly defined
Definitely.
by Cage.
Yeah.
So not easy to talk about this.
Yeah.
Well, maybe so. Let's talk about this one in particular, and that way, because I wanted to talk about two things. So, number one was the question of time, and what Viola just said about the that aspect of a work of art that seems not to be limited in time. That try to push the boundaries of the human experience and to expand it. And I think that in that example of Cage, there's something really interesting about that, which is the fact that the work exists as a score, and then every time you perform it, it's something different that will happen, and it's together dependent upon the location where you will decide to set up this performance, but also it's completely shaped by the time. What kind of radio program do you have, not only at this historical era, but also at this time of the day. So there's really in this work a very intriguing question between the permanence of the work of art and the elements of variation in the work of art, and the relationship between both of them. And knowing all of the work of John Cage on determinacy, or that's the word he uses, determinacy, and still trying to make something that is clearly identifiable, but having the goal to produce an object that is completely undetermined. I think it's a very interesting insight towards the question of the temporality of the work of art. So what do you say in your paper about that?
I mentioned how over it'll change all the time. I compare it to the other thing I talk about, which I chose it because it cuts and pastes. It's listening posts, and it cuts and pastes from the internet. So I kind of just I'm still working on my paper, of course. I should be done. I should have done it yesterday, but I was working on something else. But I just kind of commend him on that aspect of figuring out how to do that, and I just kind of,
because we could very well question this work of art by saying it's the exact same thing happening when you write a score for a symphonic orchestra. Okay, and if you write that score in the 18th century, number one, the orchestra is tuned way lower than it is today. The instruments are a little bit different, the acoustics of the rooms are different, the conductor will be different, and the final object will itself be different. So how much is that different from the imaginary landscape? How is the relationship between what's determined and what's not determined different?
Well, the thing that is being an instrument, and I kind of hit on this too, is that the thing being used as an instrument is typically used as a reception device, not as a device to produce a symphony. So I think what you say, they're very much comparable, but the relationship is that one is producing sound where the other one's outputting it, I guess. It's outputting a finished product of sound. And using that, kind of, creating this inherent feedback within it.
Do you think that it's, I'm asking the question to everyone here, do you think it's a valid difference between an instrument and a radio set? Producing and outputting sound, does that make a difference or not?
I think that it does, but at the same time it doesn't, because the output from the radio, it's random. There is not something that you were expecting. Well, yes, you are expecting, but not. It cannot be determined until you do it. Whereas with the musical instrument, it is designed. It is supposed to give at least a certain range of sounds that can be expected. There's not the infinity that you might pluck a string and then you hear the dog quack. You hear the note that was supposed to happen, unless it's out of tune, but it's still in a range. Whereas with the radio, you might turn on and it's the news, it's the music, it's hip hop, it's something else. So there's this range of sound that changes from the symphony, where you have this set of what can happen, to John Cage's, where it's any sound goes. It can be the silence of the universe.
So basically, coming back to your point, the idea is the difference is not between producing a sound and outputting a sound. The difference is in the calibration of the instrument.
So kind of like a part. So like the melody that a certain section or instrument entails part of a melody, whereas a radio can entail an entire symphony. So they're just different instruments.
Exactly.
Because they can entail different things. Whereas a concert piano can pretty much entail any entire symphony.
Well, that's
maybe.
Yeah, no, that's one of the questions here, and beyond the work of art itself. It's really contributing to redefining what is a musical instrument and what is a musical performance. And you see that just by starting to analyze this piece, we are getting here to defining, okay, what is a musical instrument? Is it something that always defines a limited range of possible sounds and stuff like this? Or is it something more complex, which is basically we could very well define a musical instrument as a means of recording music?
Well, modular synth would fit that, because with the modular synth, I mean, if you have enough pieces, you can synthesize any part of a symphony with one instrument.
Just like with the piano.
Yeah.
With the piano, you can really recreate the entire Western musical system. Okay, and you can even recreate the human body.
That's what I was wondering about. Do you consider the human body to be an instrument? Because when you're saying
yeah. Because
that respect.
of the distance between the keys, the size of the instrument
Yeah.
from left to right, the fact that you have pedals, everything. So
Yeah.
it's definitely a means of recording music, just like the
Yeah.
radio set.
Like how Jimi Hendrix notes sound different than Stevie Ray Vaughan's, and that's different
Mhm.
from my own.
Yeah.
Oh, and Eric Johnson.
Oh,
Hear
yeah.
the differences.
Yeah.
The way.
Mhm.
But what is
You
exactly
know him
called
right away.
calibration?
Calibration is it's something that pertains to the consistency of timbre throughout the production of sound with the instrument. Yeah. So an instrument is always calibrated in a way that throughout the entire range of notes that the instrument produces, there's a consistency of timbre, which means that whatever key you play on the piano, it sounds like a piano.
Okay.
That's how I define calibration. And we've seen with electricity that notion of calibration of musical instrument being completely expanded. So for example, number one, the most important electric instrument was the electric guitar, and the biggest change was the range of dynamics of the instruments. Because with a single acoustic guitar, you do not have a large range of dynamic variations. But when you add electricity to it, suddenly you have a much broader.
Yeah, their sustained vibrato is much
Yeah.
more apparent.
Yeah. And then with effects, you
Yeah, and then with effects, it's even
completely.
kind of, you can invent those pretty much
Mhm.
if you need it.
So, and cannot we imagine then that the work of John Cage with this is really questioning the idea of making music in a century where the notion of instrument is completely changed, in which the notion of calibrated instrument and consistency of timbre is not anymore a criteria for music. And the question had already been addressed before this by experiments in concrete music and stuff like this.
So when you refer to like her question about human beings being an instrument,
Uh-huh.
are you referring it more as like an instrument to play music, or would it actually be also an instrument to like for singing and creating music and with just the human body?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
I'm not a sound guy, so I don't know how to say it. Would you consider the human body being an instrument to play music without using a tool?
Yeah, uh-huh.
Okay.
I think maybe if I may have the same question, but I think if I can rephrase, you're asking if human voices could be considered as a sound, the same
A sound
that
produced
as
by
a
Yeah.
sound,
yeah.
outcome, a sound produced by an instrument, which would be the human body in this case.
Yeah. Yeah, but the question of the human voice also goes into the series of questions inspired by John Cage. For example, the human voice has been used as an instrument, but only in a very limited range of the possibilities of the human voice. Singing is just one part of what you can do with your voice.
Yeah.
And it's only the beginning of the 20th century that we started to experiment with different sound production that you can create with your voice, whispering, yelling, growling.
Beatboxing.
Yeah.
Beatboxing, yeah.
Yeah.
Begin scatting. Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's the exact same question, the question of the instrument. And because I think that in this question of the instrument, in that piece of Cage, there's this question of permanence and variation that is really immense. Okay, so we count on permanence of musical instruments for music to be almost the same throughout the centuries. So what happens when the instruments have an unlimited range of auditory production? Does music still exist or not? And what is it becoming? To me, that's the question.
Related to that, the thing that I always get back to with Cage is the tension between the score and the music.
Yeah.
And this piece just being another example of that. Like you
Uh-huh.
have 433, which is the very obvious what it's doing in that capacity. But in this piece, the fact that the radios acting as instruments producing different sounds make us question if it's a piece of music when it's very strictly laid out in a virtual space, how that's going to operate. And like that tension between, well, I mean, you know, the score is always consistent, and for traditional music we consider that sort of equivalent. Like this orchestra plays this piece by Beethoven and then another one does it, and it's completely different people, maybe a completely different arrangement of instruments, and we say it's consistent because the score is consistent, but then when that variation happens with something like a radio or something like 433 where it's completely communicated by silence, we start to say, well, it's not music anymore, or at least people that are critical of that. And that tension to me is really fascinating because we don't want it to be either one of those things.
Yeah.
Could the radio be thought of as remix, or could the symphony and the radios be thought of as remixing the score due to different amplitudes of FM signals?
Then do we apply that to any time Beethoven's Fifth Symphony is performed? That's the question that I'm getting
Yeah,
at.
that's
Is like,
the kind of same
should
thing.
we call that a different thing every time it's played?
Yeah, exactly. The the idea of the permanence of the work of art, and definitely it's very much here in that tension between what's permanent and consistent and what is not permanent and not consistent. And here I think that's a very strong case for that, to studying that. And that's also a very interesting way to investigate what is music, and to try to answer that, because you could very well say music is the performance itself, or music is the score, but you can very well say, which is to me much more reasonable, music is the result of this tension between the score and possible performance. And that's why it's always reactivated. Every time you want to set up the performance for that, you deal again with that same tension between what exists before and what will be existing. So you're always in that temporal tension between that object that is strictly atemporal, which is the score, that pre-exists the performance and that will exist after the performance, and the performance that exists only in real time. And that's to me the
I have a question since the minute that we're talking about this, which has to do with which has to do with the question of temporality between the visual and the temporal art. Because clearly what you're talking about for music is valid for theater. You have a text, and then you have a stage effect by multiple stage director, or it could be a movie for a novel for a movie, etc. So that so my question was, what is for you the key difference between the visual and the temporal art in terms of temporality? And I mean, we just use a word, but I forgot what I was talking about. So would the visual art, like painting and sculpture, be the permanent form, whereas I know that dichotomy is not valid, but I have to ask it. But within that framework, the visual art, do they belong more to the permanent state, and the temporal one more, of course, temporal and ephemeral, by the way?
Yeah.
Or, I mean, how would you talk about the tension between the visual and the temporal art within the framework of temporality?
Yeah, no, I see your question, which is okay, that tension between something that pre-exists the work of art and the experience of the work of art is less obvious in the painting, for
Yeah.
example.
So what
Where
would be the
in the
difference?
painting there seems to be a perfect coincidence
Coincidence. Yeah.
between the permanent and the variable.
Yeah. What is the difference between a painting and a score? They're both fixed image or fixed whatever materials on the surface, but one has this tension, this possibility of being performed and enacted, whereas the painting is.
Well, compare a painting that is not seen.
Mm-hmm.
So I take a painting and I hide it in an obscure museum. That would be comparable to a score of a music that's not performed.
Mm-hmm.
And the act of seeing the painting really performs what is an interpretation similar to the interpretation of a score.
Mm-hmm.
The presentation is really important in that regard. Like the fact that you are seeing it in a certain space. Like if we're going to use the white cube as an example, like in the museum like that, the painting is performing something. It is putting on a performance. And we don't make that association because we hardly ever see it outside of that context. But like if I took, any great painting that comes to mind, an obvious one, and then put it on the ground over there, that change is really jarring. And it affects us in a really jarring way. And I think it's because of that, because there's a performance happening that has changed so dramatically that we haven't considered as performance, that it completely questions the permanence of that art object, because suddenly it seems less than it was, or not as important, or not as virtuous, or something like that. There's the tension that happens in the same way.
Yeah.
Do you think you could make the connection that tension between permanent and temporary, in terms of performance, like a painting, you view it multiple times in the same place. With music, you could listen to it multiple times through the same medium. But like with music, if you were like listening to your iPod or something, do you think the performance would be part of like where you're at? Like if it were versus like walking down the street or in your car, it could affect you differently. Like
the color of the light.
You're listening to like heavy metal, and all of a sudden you start driving more dangerously.
Obviously, and there's, I think in watching a painting, like you said, it's a performance, but it's not only the painting who is performing.
Right.
It's you as a viewer, and it's the monument in which it's being displayed. There's like a huge social and political performance that's here, creating that context of the interpretation of the work of art.
I would argue that even the word permanence or being permanent is not the adequate word to use, that it should be static rather than permanent, because the huge tension between performing arts and visual, concrete, object-based art is that the object is subject in a way to the environment, the observer, how everything interacts in that way. Whereas performance has this added layer in a way of they have to be performed in order to exist and be appreciated. They exist as blueprint, and they have to be unfolded each time so that they can exist for the 1 hour of the play, or so it's more about that dynamic
But
of.
would you My question was
Yeah.
driven by this video, and I was thinking how does the digital medium actually has embedded a duration within fixed image.
Yeah.
So would you consider video as visual or performative art?
More towards visual than performative,
Why?
because you can actually have, in a way, a final piece.
Mm-hmm. But you have a duration.
You have the movie.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, you have a movie.
Mm-hmm.
You have a duration. You have to watch it to unfold, but that is set. It's not like every time you play it, something big is going to change. Like the actor is not going to be different
Yeah.
for that movie.
Robert Downey Jr. always gives his best performance because that's the one they put in the cut.
Yeah. Unless you go and remake it, and then there's another discussion about appropriation and representation. But
Okay.
whereas in the theater, even with the same actor, within the same theater, each time it unfolds, something might change. One step further, one longer S. It's not going to be the exact same as the other one.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
It's really interesting to think about this idea of static and temporary, and how commonly people, even with movies, music, anything, they try to reproduce it so that performance doesn't change as much and it's just a static. Like with movies,
Yeah.
go to any movie and the setup is very similar, because they try to make that environment not affect the movie as much as possible. But at a certain point, is it possible to have it exactly the same every time you experience the art? Like for a movie, for example, watch it multiple times. If you watch it a second time, you'll pick up on more things the second time, and it changes your experience of it. It brings up an interesting question of, is it possible to ever have something that is actually close to permanent and would be experienced the same, or close to the same every single time?
I would say no.
Yeah, like it's almost like, I can't remember math terms. Like to have a graph where it gets really close but never touches.
Asymptotic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of what reminds me.
What is the name? The word?
An
Asymptotic.
asymptotic,
Asymptotic.
like a
Asymptotic.
diminishing
Yeah.
returns.
Yeah.
It pushes infinity but never touches.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The question then is, with film or video, is where does the actualization end that you could call it a static thing? Is it as a digital file, which is the edited version of perhaps film or digital film? Is it that it's on this specific screen? Because there's so many different ways for interpreting that for me make video in many ways fall under performance, because
Me too.
the hardware itself is so variable, and then if you discount that, then you're just dealing with a completely conceptual idea of what video is.
Yeah, I fully agree on that, and I would add to that compression also is a very performative thing happening when you read a video file, because most of the content of the image is recreated on the fly when you decompress your video file, so it's entirely performative. And depending on the performance of your computer, the decompression is actualized in many different ways. So there's never twice the same video file being played, ever, even without looking at the screen.
Yeah.
It's like it's impossible to experience art in a vacuum. So it's just
Oh yeah.
it seems just absolutely impossible. It's like there's no way to experience anything without having it change by
And-
the selects. But
And that's what brings us back to the initial question that Bill Viola was saying, is that there's always something very intriguing in the work of art that always transcends its temporal dimension. Like it's the same, but it's never the same. And that whole idea of being able to produce and to enjoy the experience of watching, hearing something that we know it's the same, but we feel that it's different. I think it's what makes our relationship to art so great and so intense, when we feel that tension. And even on a work of art that is more or less static, like a painting, you can actually see that tension of time. And you know that the painting doesn't look the way it looked 100 years ago. And you know that you're not looking at it the way people 100 years ago were looking at it. So there's something variable introduced in the painting, but still it's always a portal to an identity that transcends time. And I think that's what makes for the spiritual dimension of the work of art. It's something that connects you to a temporal dimension that really transcends the your dimension, your temporal dimension, and the temporal dimension of the object. You can see history with the capital H in the work of art, and you can actually feel it and understand it.
The aura that Walter Benjamin talks about.
Exactly. Yeah, is definitely part of that. It's part of that idea that the work of art carries something that is not exactly what you see or what it seems to be. And it's interesting also the capacity of the work of art to be renewed by time. And last week we were looking at the Crossing by Bill Viola and comparing that to the videos of the Jordanian pilot being burnt by ISIS. And to me what happens is that the video by Bill Viola captures this ISIS video and incorporates the meaning of this ISIS video into itself as a work of art. And it's slightly transformed from its vision from last year when that ISIS video did not exist. So that has contributed to augment Bill Viola's video. Because right now it really, and I like to use the term it captures this video, because instead of being changed by it, what it does is it takes it and incorporates it into its work. The work of art, it's a work, it's something that works, meaning that it captures your imagination, your power of interpretation, and takes it into something that has been designed and created by Bill Viola to create this impression of there's something sacred happening. And that is undestroyable. And it keeps being changed and enriched every time. You see it.
It's kind of how current events put a filter over our experience in a way. Or, I mean, it's kind of problematic because that's taken our previous experience into
filter, because I think there's something active in the work of art. As I said, it's a work, and there's something active, and a work of art has the capacity to capture events and things happening in the now, and to reincorporate all of that in its own presence.
Sort of more catalyzing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because that's one of the things I keep saying is works of art do change you. And if they do not, they are not works of art. And to me, that's one of the signs when I go to a museum or a gallery. If I feel changed, even slightly, in my intention, in my way of listening, in my way of hearing, in my way of asking questions about music and instruments, that's a work of art. If I'm not, it's something else. paper or something that attracts my attention for quite limited amount of time. But if I feel changed, that's to me the sign of the work of art.
But I would say that at the same time, you're changing the work of art as well, because you're adding that meaning, that new question that you found, or that new answer to a question. You are augmenting the power of the work of art that it didn't have it until you experienced it.
Yeah, agreed. And that's what makes works of art unique as object. It's the rare objects that we create and exchange that have this capacity of being enriched by human experiences and enriching human experiences and lives. You cannot say the same thing from a car, even if it's a beautiful Bugatti and stuff like that. It's different. Or a beautifully designed object. Its existence and the capacity to transcend experience is different, and it's much more limited.
But how is this different? This is a bit provocative, but how is it different from my grandmother car that my mother used and gave it to my, let's say, older sister who passed that car to me? So the kind of value,
I think,
of
yeah, for
mutual
you,
affection that I will add to that car.
fully agree that for you it has that capacity, but only for you.
But when I will go after him and look at the painting and the way he has transformed the painting, that's what you just said, right? Like, the painting is not only affecting him, but also in return he affects the painting. This is also foreign to me. I cannot relate with what he adding to the painting, unless he wrote the critics of it and then belongs to the discourse about that painting. But if I come right after you and look at the same object, how can your experience of that piece affect mine?
Because I talk about it.
Okay.
Even something as simple as if you saw him view it first.
Or if you see someone viewing it.
Mm-hmm.
But your idea of an object that has been transmitted to you through time by someone in your family, well, it has that same value, but it's only limited to yourself.
Okay.
Unless you present it in a museum.
Or you explain to another
Or you-
person, this is my great-grandmother's car, or locket or something. And then we can understand in a way, not appreciate the same, but know that it's important and has this aura that is...
But the problem with that object is that it will always be dependent upon your explanation to convey that kind of change. Where a work of art can completely independently from any explanation express and convey these kind of changes and feelings and emotions and values. You can actually see it. And when Bill Viola talked about these prehistorical objects like a bone, and it has 2 marks that have been made by a human hand, there's something that is impossible to explain. Why is it so important?
What about if people view something that is considered art that are ignorant to why it would be art and it doesn't affect them? Like if you had like found art, for example, if you had found art and somebody just walks past it not realizing it's even art, could that be considered? Like, because it sounds like your definition would be that it would affect everybody, but could you say everybody? Like there could be those people that are ignorant to it.
Yeah, no, and you're right, and that's one of the questions, and that's one of the critiques made to contemporary art, saying, okay, it's not art because it does not have the capacity to touch everyone, regardless of their education. And to that, I would answer the Joseph Boy's performance. Can we teach aesthetics to a rabbit? but it's just a bad joke. But the idea, okay, so basically your question is, okay, are there some universal traits in works of art that make them accessible to everyone?
Or recognizable.
Yeah. I must say,
I think the fact that they put on exhibition, I mean, even if you don't accept it, you know it's in that contemporary art museum as a piece of art.
I was in a contemporary art museum, and I cannot remember the life of me what the name of it was, but they had some. It wasn't like as much found art, but like one of the pieces in there was a hole in the wall. It looks like somebody hit the wall with a sledgehammer.
Yeah.
And sitting next to it was a bunch of folding chairs sitting around in a circle. I had no idea that those were art. One of my classmates at the time, when we went there, sat down on one of the things, and the museum, like the guy watching, like yelled at him. He's like, "Hey, it's like if anything isn't covered with leather, you can't sit in it." And he's like, "Oh, I didn't realize it was a piece of art." Or the hole in the wall. It's like,
Wow.
it's like it looks like someone just hit it with a sledgehammer.
Looks like it needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
I had a similar experience when I was young. I most jarring was a cassette tape with all the cassette pulled out and it just laid down on the ground.
Yeah.
And I've had a strong inclination to throw, because when tape's messed up as a kid, it's like, okay, throw this one away because like I recorded on it too much or something, but it's just like
I
it
used to
looked.
take that stuff and hang it on the ceiling.
Or make a deck. I mean, that's kind of.
I wonder, now that I'm thinking about it, I wonder if you could make the argument that it's art because you want to interact with it, and then you'll find out eventually. Like if you sit in that chair, someone's gonna yell at you.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe that's part of the experience, is that you didn't know.
The fact that I can't throw it away.
No, that's a very valid observation, I think. The fact that being a work of art is questionable. I think it's probably part of the work of art itself. And obviously we are in this paradigm of, okay, can anything pretend being a work of art? Since 1917 we are in here with that question, and we need to get out of here.
Yeah.
Okay, because it's
Boring.
huh?
So boring.
It is
That
boring.
question.
It is boring. Can any object be a work of art because an artist has decided so, or an institution has decided so, and stuff like that? And what's going on with this? But the problem is how to get out of this with elegance. That's
Well, I mean,
that's all we're left with.
Yeah.
Elegance and rhetoric, and that's the problem, and caution, because anything you would be saying here on that topic can really be turned against you the next day. So, and I would tend to say, and that can seem completely conservative, I would tend to say that uninformed public should go to jail. No. An informed public could detect that there's something going on in a work of art that makes it different from something else. I would tend to say that and be quite confident about this idea. That if the wall, the hole in the wall that you saw and the tables that you saw, if you and your friend were not able to understand that this was something different than just accidents, it's a work of art that missed its point. There was something wrong, poorly done. Maybe it was not staged well enough. Maybe it was not the light was not correct, maybe there was something in the environment that was that failed for this to be visible as a work of art. And I think that yes, almost anyone informed should be, or loosely informed about works of art should be able to understand this dimension. And then you like it or you do not like it, but at least you have that connection. But that's a difficult question, really very difficult.
I agree with all of that assessment of how to wiggle out of the dilemma. I think that it comes from this misconception that for art to affect us, it has to be a positive effect. That we have to be like, oh, that inspired me. Wow, I like that. It's okay to watch art or see a piece of art and say, that I don't like that, or that's not art.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just by doing that, by raising that question, it already did something.
Yeah.
I know my childhood visit to the Contemporary Art Museum, it changed me. The works changed me. It changed how I, it brought up that question,
Yeah.
but, it definitely, seeing the blanket stuffed in the laundry basket changed me
Yeah.
in that setting.
But I agree that the setting also affects if it's perceived as a work of art or not. Because if you find a blanket thrown in the middle of the grass in a park, you're not gonna go, "Oh, look, what a nice statue."
Right.
Yeah.
So,
No, there's definitely the context framing the experience, but and so I say that, and on the at the same time I'm saying people who go to the museum have to go through education before. I'm sorry, it's strange the idea that it would be normal to go to a museum or to an art gallery without any idea of what's going on in here. I think it's completely wrong. And I think that our societies have that duty of teaching people about what's going on in a museum. It should not be as it is today, where we expect kids being taken in a bus and thrown in the museum to have an artistic experience out of
Yeah.
nowhere, nothing, out of the hood in which they were kept. It doesn't work. No, that's silly. The idea is, yes, there's some intellectual thing to be done prior to this exposition to the work of art.
Yeah, but that ain't gonna happen. It's dumbing
But
down.
no,
Well,
that
I
no,
mean,
that
I was
has to
I was
happen.
lucky.
No,
No, I
in
agree
my
with you. I'm just saying the anti-intellectualization of America right now is on a downward spiral.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen.
no,
Right
but
now.
In the schools, I'm talking about
mean,
take away their art and their music.
When I was in second grade,
You know.
I was in gifted and talented program all throughout elementary, and all we focused on was art and culture in second grade.
But I'm talking about overall the public schools.
Yeah, but
They're just taking-
overall,
because
I
their
mean-
budgets, they're taking
I mean,
their
I was
budgets,
lucky I
and
was
so,
where I was
I
I
to,
mean,
to
at
get
least
that.
they have a bus to take them and dump
Right.
them there, and maybe they might get the opportunity to have that spark happen where they might understand or they might be changed.
I
You
think
know,
it-
thank goodness for
Yeah,
that.
and the museums have a large responsibility in that state of the situation, wanting to absorb larger and larger audiences but doing nothing for education. I'm sorry,
Mm.
it doesn't work, and it's really concerning. And that's true that for some of these kids, maybe one of them will be randomly changed by viewing one of the paintings and stuff like this.
I think that's the hope.
Yeah,
But you
that's
cannot rely on chance to educate a nation.
or
Okay,
brute
but-
force of just by numbers. One of them. One. Just.
But would that
like
be
advertising.
would that be better than just not going? Because I mean, I completely agree with you, but at the same time, it's like out of that my experience going to that art museum, out of the entire class, I had that experience, so I could share it today.
Yeah,
But like you send, it's almost like you send a bunch of people and you hope that it's affect someone, and maybe that one person can spread it. It's like plant that seed in that class, hopefully.
Yeah,
But
I'm not that optimistic.
I mean, is that a better option than not going, or because like you said, I mean, we're fighting right now just to keep art in school, and that's harder than just sending the kids. Like,
Well, and what we can hope is that from this visit to the museum, there's a docent that will talk about
Yeah,
the
I usually
works
see
of art and
docents at the
educate.
DMA when I go.
Yeah,
So.
no, I'm being mean, but
Oh.
the general idea. Well, but same thing. Throw 3,000 people at the Aurora Festival. What do you do? What does that do?
Was that thing last fall?
Yeah,
Yes, the
that's
big red show.
ridiculous.
It was so bad.
And
It was, I
and
You look
missed
for a
it.
corn
Didn't
dog.
miss it. Didn't miss it is the
Really?
thing.
and
The art
the
was
idea.
horrible.
So you see that we have the two things, and I think they coexist completely. One is yes, you need to have some education to benefit from art, and the other one is you should not.
Well,
And I think
would
that's
want it.
the reality is really between these two things. And you should not, meaning that we should be existing in intelligent societies where we are all educated about art and we can all by ourselves enjoy that artistic experience. And I think that's probably one of the most positive message that we can get out of the complexity of contemporary art is that it requires education. And if we can keep that claim alive, art requires education. It's not just fun, and it does not have to be instant pleasure for any kind of audience. No, it requires education. So if we can work collectively to build societies in which everyone is educated enough to understand art,
so do you
that's
think
the goal. And
even with like popular movies, the newest big movie comes out, do you think people need to have some sort of education in art just to see that movie?
Oh yeah. To me, yeah. That's the question.
no, I agree. For that should be true for any work of art. But today, popular movies are just
I mean, I think
meant to be pleasant to
The-
anyone.
with
They're
that
like
question,
targeting that audience of
Yeah,
instant
yeah.
gratification.
Exactly. So, and that's the problem. Is it's a problem in education in general. Is you should never target the average level of your audience. You should always target the highest and even beyond the highest level
The
of your
highest level of
audience.
expectation.
Okay, you can, because if your level of exchange is at the same all the time, there's no exchange anymore. You need a difference for an exchange. You need for electrical current to travel, you need the difference in potential. For water to flow, you need a difference in elevation. And for intelligence to flow, you need difference in levels of conceptualization. It's just natural.
To improve, you have to have a delta.
and,
Yeah.
and your question brings to mind the strike in post-production in motion media. I mean, really, before then, it was not a household fact that, or I mean, it's known, but you know, post-production special effects people didn't get the recognition they get now until there was this whole strike of, you know, of like, you know, this is what your movie's going to look like, and just having a green swatch,
Yeah.
because
Mhm.
that's the truth of it, you know. So I think that kind of, you know, everyone's more educated about that now, and I mean, we see special effects that, you know, we know they're not real, yet they feel so, you know, such an
I think
extension.
the hard part about it, I agree with you. I think the hard part about it is when you say everyone.
Yeah,
Because
you're
there's
right.
always those people that will look at a
Exactly.
movie and they'll see an alien in the movie.
Yeah,
and they're
exactly. And that's a
Like,
real
it's like
alien.
that's a really good costume. It's like
Yeah.
that's actually CGI.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
It's like people just don't understand that. Or if I keep talking to my animator friends about this. Like I show somebody who's really uninformed in my demo reel,
Hmm.
and a a lot of people's first reaction is, "Oh, you drew that?" It's like, no, that's not how it works. But it's that level of ignorance.
Yeah,
It's
definitely.
just like going back to the other thing. You can never have a permanent piece of art. It's almost you can never say everyone. You can
Yeah.
never have all inclusive.
Mhm.
And that's but it also goes back to we always have to aim higher,
Yeah.
because the hope is if you aim higher, you'll bring that average up.
No child left behind, right?
There will,
They're all
well,
being left behind. Shit.
yeah, but you'll always have that. You'll always have that child left behind.
Sorry,
You'll
that
always
was a
have that
bad
person
joke.
at the bottom. So your hope is to bring everybody up, and that person at the bottom will hopefully come up that little bit more too.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's the hope, anyways.
Yeah.
I have a question for you about that artwork that your friend sat in.
Yeah.
When you think about it now, what do you think it was? What do you think the artist was trying to say that maybe you didn't get? You were changed, but now being older, wiser, and
What?
More educated.
more educated.
Well, what they were trying to say.
I don't know.
Well, when I actually after realizing that was a piece of art, they were a bunch of brown fold-up chairs that were in a circle, and it looked like the interesting thing about it is it looked like it was actually inviting people to come sit down and actually have a conversation with each other, like it was inviting community. It's like, here, like come in a circle like we are now and talk and share. And that's what it sounded like. But the ironic thing about it is if you did that, you get yelled at.
Mhm.
That's actually when I was, at the time, that's the impression that I got after actually looking at it as a
Even
piece
with
of
the
art.
hole in the wall. You
The
still-
hole in the wall
still
was
got
actually a
that?
different piece of art.
Oh,
It was
okay.
just next to it.
Oh, I
which
thought
was
it was
also
like
a
part of the
drawing.
same one. I was
I-
like, that sounds like an AA meeting or some type of support group.
Right?
No,
To be honest,
seriously.
That was my same
Yeah.
thought.
I don't know.
Someone stormed
Because
out.
it was also, the art wasn't labeled by an artist. It was another reason that it was hard to tell that it was a piece of art, is this museum did not label the art. You actually had to ask about it. But the hole in the wall was a few feet away, and it didn't seem, to be honest, it didn't seem like connected. If it was, I would have no idea. Because a few feet the other direction, there was a giant glass sculpture that was obviously art. So it was like giant glass sculpture, circle of chairs, hole in the wall.
So bad curation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting though to think about it now.
Mhm.
Mhm. Okay. Next week maybe we'll talk about an intriguing work of art, and I saw that some of you started to talk about this. It's the what's his name? This one. Corey Archangel's recreation of Schoenberg's Klavierstücke with cat videos from internet. and I will talk about that because I think it's an amazing work of art. And also I want to use it to talk about that capacity of a work of art to capture another one into an identical movement. And I think that this one is a good example, and I would use it also as an example of the importance of historical references. When we analyze works of art, is to be able to really look at the historical references. So you're looking at Corey Arcangel, and you need to know who is Schoenberg. And if you start talking about Archangels on that piece without knowing Schoenberg, you're making a mistake. Probably unless you're very good at this, but and that work, and I think it's mysterious how good is this work of art, and exactly what it is. Who knows it already? Who has seen
Yeah.
it?
I think I've watched it, but I know about it.
And it goes on, and the Archangel did three pieces, and it's not about the concept of cuteness. It's not about cuteness in the 21st century. So we'll be talking about that next week, and the relationship between this and the work of Arnold Schoenberg, to explore that idea of reference and how to use historical context in the approach of studying your work of art, which John Cage was also music from.
Yeah, I think he used some ancient Chinese.
Well, that, but his training in music
Oh, yeah.
comes from Schoenberg.
Oh wow.
Yeah. It's very interesting. Yes, and he uses the what's the name of these divination tools with small sticks that you throw. You don't know that? The yeeking.
Oh, Eugene?
Yeah.
Mm.
That's what he used to create some of his works of art. Just like
Kind
he-
of based on mathematical random.
Yeah, and
Concept.
so it has the exact same origin
Yeah.
as
Oh.
in Schoenberg's music. And it also, similarly in Cage's imaginary landscape, it questions the notion of the instrument, just like here.
Yeah.
So you see, that's the same thing here.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, instead of having one perfectly well calibrated piano, you have this crazy piano being played by cats. And that's the same thing than using radio sets to make music.
Yes.
Exact same idea. Okay?
Awesome.
All right, well, thank you.
Should we move towards 6300?
Yeah, I will just interrupt the stream and start it over so that we have two distinct videos for the two classes.
What YouTube channel is this?
It's, that's a good question. It's my
I was
YouTube
looking for
channel.
this.
Kind of.
Last
Okay.
presenting.
Yeah. And it's back to Roger.
Interrupt the stream.